Welcome to this year's Hardware Con event. My name is Tim Beharon. I'm president of Creative Strategies. I've had the privilege of being involved with the show in the past, and we're taking time today in this particular session to look at the impact the pandemic has had, not just on us as individuals, but also in the tech sector and its abilities to survive, thrive, and even reinvent during that period. During the last recession, 2008, 2009, I had a chance to talk with the CEO of Intel, Paul Otellini, the late Paul Otellini, who was CEO at the time. And at that particular time, we were going into a significant recession. And I asked him, I said, what does Intel do during a difficult time for the industry, for the economy, et cetera? And he says, we actually double our R&D. We believe it's really important to spend time and effort and money to research the future at a time where there may be a pause. And a little bit of a surprise, the pandemic actually caused greater demand for technology. We didn't actually have a pause, but I think we're at a bit of an inflection point now where I do see the need for more invention, more investment capital, more of the tech sector to try to solve some of the greater problems that we have. And so today I have three distinct speakers who are going to help us with this. One is Mark Rose, who is a product lead at Facebook and is involved with their video AR and VR. Lee, who is the CEO and co-founder of Singular AI, a pre-A healthcare AI startup, and Shaheen Farshi, who is a partner at Lux Capital. All of them are very well established in their particular expertise and are going to give us some good feedback. So Mark, I'm going to start with you today. Facebook has grown actually during the pandemic. I know from my standpoint, it was an important site for me to communicate with family and friends, especially since we couldn't see them. But how has the pandemic changed the landscape from design to product development to consumer behavior from your perspective?
From my perspective, obviously the pandemic shaped a lot. I think there's a couple of key trends that really changed. So one is we're all working from home, right? Here I am recording this from home. So that means we've got to be able to communicate remotely, almost exclusively on a number of things. And that has a lot of implications for anyone involved in software development or hardware development. So what does that mean? It means tons and tons and tons of video conferencing, right? A company no one ever heard of before, Zoom, becomes so popular now we have Zoom fatigue, which is another new word, which didn't exist even a year ago. So communication has been super important. Also, for anyone developing in hardware, this has been a really interesting landscape because in hardware, you used to manipulating things with your hands and touching them and feeling them. But all of a sudden, when your CMs are in Asia and your prototypers are somewhere else, it's hard to get these products in hand and use and kind of share them with the team because the team is kind of all over the place. That's been a really interesting challenge. And I think a lot of companies have kind of risen up to that. And I think it's opening up a lot of opportunities. And in some ways, it's kind of breaking the mold of how products used to be created in a positive way, especially for startups, because now that's a little bit of the norm and you can go ahead and do that and make it work. From a consumer perspective, obviously just a lot of what I just said, which was consumers are now also communicating online and so forth. But there's been another major shift, which impacts both software and hardware. There's been a shift from buying a lot offline to now buying a lot online, right? You've seen Amazon, go up and to the right. Actually, all the online companies have gone up and to the right with e-commerce. But also, I think in the hardware space, I think what I've seen before, and I think this is accelerated over the last year, is kind of the specialization of new hardware products, and people are willing to try them, right? Because they can't go into the store and feel them, but they're like, that's a cool new product I just saw, let me buy it. And so I think the opportunity for companies in this space are now that the consumer barriers for buying things they've never touched before are reduced, to actually reduce those barriers even further, doing things like free shipping, free returns, things like that, encouraging trial, encouraging adoption, because consumers are now more willing than ever to do it. Most of their experiences in the last year doing this have been good. And so I think that poses a great opportunity for new hardware companies to build new products, deploy new products, and rely on an online community for buying them and adopting them and trying them out.
Mark, I'll go back to you on that particular point. How do you suggest a new startup or a new hardware company, especially since this is hardware con, how do they go about looking at new opportunities, and then what are the steps that they should take?
I think in new opportunities, you've always got to look at your customers and potential problems, right? Potential opportunities, potential delight points. It seems to me every time I go for a walk, I'm seeing another new animal on wheels that's electrified in some way, whether it's a skateboard or a scooter or a moped or a bike configuration, and none of them say Trek or Specialized or so forth, right? So you're seeing all these new brands emerging. So I think you look at core consumer behaviors, how those are changing, and try and find insights from those behaviors to build new hardware products around it. And then what are the steps to do that? Well, the steps are always, I think that hasn't changed, which is build a prototype quickly, validate it quickly, see if you can build a market and find customers to buy it.
So that leads to a very good question for Shaheen. As an investor and a partner at Lux Capital, where you have looked at all kind of types of products over the last X amount of years that you've been doing this, raising money seems to have become very easy for some startups, well, incredibly hard for others. How should a company go about raising venture dollars, and from whom? And what are the particular areas of focus that you are on today?
Sure. So I've been investing at Lux for the past 15 years. Lux has been around for 20. We've invested in deep tech across healthcare and technology. I've led investments in chips, rockets, satellites, driverless cars, so across the value chain. And what I've seen thrive, the types of companies that thrive are the ones that are trying to introduce a new use case or a new experience for the customer, as opposed to trying to put out a gadget that is incrementally better than that of an incumbent. In fact, many large companies have very, very capable teams, whether it's on product development, whether it's on marketing, that are constantly experimenting with incrementally different or new products. And I think it is naive for a startup company to go head to head against that. These large companies have very large or long reach. They have economies of scale. And so to go head to head with them with a gadget or a product that is somewhat better or somewhat different, I think will be an uphill battle for a startup. So if I were an entrepreneur interested in starting a hardware company, I would think about the novel experience that this product could provide, or an experience that could be provided to a customer that currently is not served by an existing incumbent. And that could be because the incumbent does not have a channel to this market or doesn't really care for this market for a variety of reasons. So it's either a new product it's either a new market that you're going after, or it has to be a significantly unique and special experience that you're offering to the customer. As far as the question on areas where investors are really interested right now, investors are looking to put capital to work towards rapidly growing businesses that have very, very attractive unit economics. And for those that are in this audience, being hardware companies, they are fundamentally disadvantaged relative to the software companies that are able to obtain those kinds of unit economics, the ability to raise and grow and again achieve scale a lot more quickly than hardware companies. So I would, as an entrepreneur, I would think about how I could build a business while being a hardware business could potentially achieve those kinds of software-like economics. And that's where the creativity, in my opinion, comes in. And that goes beyond just technology and product features, but that goes around how you market, how you design the product, which community or audience or market you go after, and ultimately how you position your product. And that's where a lot of the novelty and the innovation comes in.
Those are wonderful points. But can you give me a practical example of something you look for when you have a presentation in front of you? I've sat through multiple VC presentations for startups over the decades. And it's changed, obviously, from how they used to do it and what the focus is. This is a very different VC market these days. I think it's changed dramatically.
Yeah, it has.
What is it? Let's say that I'm a soft hardware company and I want to present to a VC or an angel investor for that matter. What are the key points that those need to be for you to even get their attention?
Yeah, I'll give you a generic answer and maybe we can talk about hardware specifically. The generic answer is that I personally look for a founding team that can attract world-class, top-notch talent. And by doing so is able to punch above its weight and go out there and raise more money that then enables them to raise or attract more talent and create this virtuous cycle of talent attracting capital, attracting more talent. And so that obviously doesn't exist in a vacuum. That comes with a vision, whether it's a vision for a business, a vision for a product, a vision for an experience that those customers will have, and what makes this an interesting business for investors. So that ability to articulate and communicate that vision to a lay audience that doesn't necessarily have to have a PhD in physics to be able to appreciate that advantage that they're bringing to bear, I think will allow them to do that. And so that's what I look for. Now, in many occasions, the opportunity may not be obvious. And in that case, if those core elements are there, then I would be willing to take a leap of faith on the viability of the vision and the viability of this proposed business model, knowing that if they attract amazing people and raise money from high quality investors, then eventually that business model and that product can be tuned to become something very interesting. And we've seen that happen over and over again with many of the most valuable companies that are around right now. If we look at the amazing companies like Facebook and Amazon and Apple, if you looked at them in the early days, they were very different from what they became right now. But the common theme is that they built cultures that attracted great people. Those great people accomplished great things, and they attracted a lot of money to further that trend that they've created.
One clarification point or question for you, and then I want to go to Wei Li. Are you early stage, mid stage in your investments?
Early stage.
Very good, thanks. I want to ask Wei Li a couple of questions. She is coming from a healthcare perspective, and the crisis in healthcare was significant. In fact, I lost my brother during the pandemic last April, and I saw an immense amount of difficulties in that early phase of the pandemic. And as a healthcare AI startup, how did that affect you guys at that point? Did it accelerate what you were trying to do? Did it allow you to bring in new capital? I mean, give us a little bit of idea of how the pandemic impacted you guys as an actual early stage startup. Because you're now, as I understand it, looking at Series A now, right?
That's right. So we are pre-A. And when the pandemic hits, actually, we just launched our first ever product. And 3 days ago, again, California is a lockdown. So it's actually hit us pretty hard at the very beginning for the first several months. And then, all the crises of COVID-19 and also like all the US-China trade war almost completely block our manufacturer and R&D. We don't have chips. We don't have, things we need to build a product. But exactly like what you started was like during the crisis, companies invested more in R&D. That's what exactly we did. And because we don't have access to the chips that we used to have, we adopted NVIDIA. And actually that opened up the whole opportunity for us now. So we have edge computing devices and to integrate that with our software and everything. And the combination of the software, AI, and smart devices actually help us a lot to address the healthcare AI issues like data acquisition, patient data privacy, and all the and also the new trend of federated learning, like people share model, not share data. So that is exactly healthcare AI that are asking for from the technology side. So I'll say, yes, we will hit badly at the beginning, but we come out of it with a new generation, like a new line of the products. And I think that new products fit well with the healthcare industry in even before the crisis, and even better for after the crisis. That is how actually we get in and come out of the crisis in the past year. And another thing I want to sort of add on and follow up with Mark's comments previously is that the global collaborations, and previously as a combination of healthcare, AI, and we have devices, not that smart devices before the crisis, all the collaborations is hard. Well, as a startup, we focused in California and the local hospitals, healthcare system. Because if we collaborate with East Coast, the Midwest, or even Europe, there's going to be a lot of traveling involved. It's just not physical for a startup. But you know what? Because of the crisis or the digitalization and the remote work and collaborations, now during the COVID-19, we started collaborations with hospitals in Midwest, East Coast, Europe, and now we have a multi-center collaboration projects going on. I think that is kind of a benefit of people adopting more and more, the teleconference and everything. That's the major benefit. And of course, I think it's true for all the AI learning healthcare companies. The pandemic drives really in a good way of the digitalization. So we suddenly have more and more data digitalized for AI training. So I think the edge computing for our product, the global collaboration, and all the digitalization actually a really good trend for startup like us.
Very good. So we've talked a little bit about your thinking of where you are and also at the investment level of where things are today. Let's talk a little bit about the future now. And Mark, I want to come back to you. What are the driving forces shaping the next decade, and what are the key ingredients for any new product?
So I think some of the big forces driving the future here, as you're thinking about making new products, think about a couple key tenets first. So one is AI. It's a huge driver. People expect it in products. Your question is, as you're building a product, is how can I make my product intelligent? How can I make my product learn? How can I make my product anticipate what the user wants? I think that's kind of a key ingredient. Another key ingredient, I think, for anything involved in consumer world is safety and security. I think in the hardware space, people think like, hey, let me build a great piece of hardware, and it's obviously probably going to connect to something, but they think of safety and security as an afterthought, and it really should be an early thought, should be built into the design, literally thinking like, how can every bit of data that's coming into my device be encrypted from start to finish? When it's stored, I want it to be encrypted, just everything, just like lock it down. I mean, we've seen even recently, hackers are breaking in and doing ransomware and things like that, and all products are susceptible about this. And the last piece I'll add to this is community. And this is I think an older piece, and not a new one, but I think it's something that's really shaping how products work. And that is, how do you make products that actually bring people together, that actually create communities, that kind of create network effects? And I think this goes to a lot of Shaheen's points, which is like, how do you create additional value? And I think this goes into network effects. So how do you create that community? And then the next question is, and this goes to I'll call my early product thinking. My early product thinking, I was always thinking about like, how do I make happy path products, which is products that work really well for the happy path, which solve like people who really like it and it works. And the edge cases are like important. I'll figure out ways to solve those, but I don't really worry about them. I'd say in the last decade or so, I've really shifted my thinking on that, which is a happy path is obvious. But the other piece is, especially with network products, is how do you design your products? Actually, from the get-go, again with security, how do you design your products where you anticipate the bad actors? And when you anticipate the bad actors, and you think about all the bad things they can do, and you design your product around that, so that when the bad actors come, and they will, your product is actually designed in such a way that it's designed to manage that. And again, I think that really helps the community aspect. So again, the three pillars that I'm really looking at as you're building products are around AI, safety and security. Just make sure it's updatable. Any piece of hardware that goes out in the field has got to be updatable. I think it started with phones. My hat's off to Tesla. They've made all their cars updatable. I love it when my Tesla updates every 2 weeks. It's just an awesome experience. But any piece of hardware that you put out there, make sure that it's updatable all the way down to the firmware level, and make sure that it updates frequently and regularly and securely. And if you can have those three pillars deeply embedded in your product, I think it'll do really well.
When you talk about security and encryption for a hardware company, are you talking about it both at the hardware and software level? I mean, hardware has to have software to work. For example, the semiconductor companies are building actual security code into the CPUs at the moment. And they're giving that capability at that level of hardware. But when you're dealing with products that, are not with advanced CPUs, what methods do they use to add that level of security?
What I'm really talking about is a level of design thinking. I've seen lots of products out there where it's like secure, right? It's a secure device and it connects through HTTPS or something like that. And then they put it on a server and it's all stored in clear text, right? As an example, right? What I'll say is it's a way of design thinking. So if you're communicating data, and I don't care if it's personal data, I don't care if it's like temperature data, right? Any kind of data that you're communicating between devices or between devices in cloud, always make sure that that data is encrypted in transit. Always make sure that data is encrypted when it's stored somewhere, and ideally also make sure it's encrypted when it's stored locally as well too. And if you approach it with this as design thinking, you'll really greatly reduce your potential of being hacked and your potential of letting your consumers down, right? Because they expect for their devices to be connected, secure, and private. And the bar for that has really gone up in the last few years.
Sure. Now, Shaheen, you as a VC are looking at, as you mentioned earlier, you're looking at a lot of different types of companies. One sector that has been extremely hot over the last couple of years is autonomous driving. At this particular point, we see a lot of activity there. How soon are we going to see what we would call autonomous cars, or let's call it robo-taxis, level 4 and level 5? And one follow-up to that as well is how do you look at what I consider another major opportunity in the future, which is AR and VR?
These are two buzzwords that have attracted a significant amount of capital. One category being AR, VR, the other being autonomous cars, at least in most folks' perspective, made it to the mainstream. I can talk about AR, VR first because we've touched on some of this already. In the case of AR, VR, I feel like as if the technology is there. The challenge right now is the content, is the use case. I think there aren't attractive enough, exciting enough use cases that would compel people to go out and spend a couple $100 on a headset. I think until now, getting a headset was a challenge. Facebook, I guess Mark can speak to this perhaps more than I can, but they were sold out. Getting one was difficult, and they've done a fantastic job making a high quality head-mounted display very accessible. And the library today is good. There you go. But it's not enough for someone who is otherwise not a video game fanatic or a VR fanatic to dish out the money to purchase one of these devices. And I do believe that there will be a future, a none too distant one, where average folks will go out and buy these headsets for not just, experiencing VR, but to experience something specific. If you look at video games back in the early 80s, people didn't purchase game consoles because they wanted to play video games. They bought the game consoles because they wanted to play Pong, or they wanted to play Pac-Man. And then later, Contra and Super Mario. It wasn't about, oh, I want to play a video game. It was, oh, I want to play Super Mario. I want to play Zelda. And it's my expectation that now that these headsets are becoming more available and accessible, then we will have extremely talented people who would consider building content for these machines. In fact, I've invested in a company called Survios, which is extremely talented game developers and publishers from the traditional game industry that are now making very, very high quality content for multi-reality, whether it's 2D or VR. And so I'm very optimistic about that space. On the autonomous driving side, I feel like, again, many billions have gone in, but we still don't have robo-taxis that we can hail at the corner unless we live in Arizona or one of these geographies where whether it's Cruise or Waymo are prototyping their vehicles for limited access. And it's my expectation that it's going to probably take longer than what people expect for those robo-taxis to become common. But what I also expect is for a lot of the features that exist in our cars today, whether it's adaptive cruise control or it's lane keeping, or for those of us who have Teslas like Mark, autopilot to become more and more capable to reduce the cognitive load on the driver while not necessarily being entirely autonomous. So I feel like in the next, say, 4 or 5 years, we're going to see more and more vehicles ranging from Kias to Bentleys to have some level of this cognitive reduction technology for the driver to make the driver feel like as if there's not as much of a load on them, and it'll make them safer drivers, and it'll relieve traffic out on the streets and highways. And then eventually in time, these two trends, the automation of existing cars that still require drivers and the development of these robo-taxis to at some point merge, maybe say, 5-10 years from now, where you can also, hail a robo-taxi. But again, it's going to take longer than what people expected, let's say 4 or 5 years ago.
It's a great perspective. ML and AL and AI in general has been relatively slow to get adopted in the healthcare side. What are the challenges to see broader acceptance?
For us, there's, or in generally speaking, all the regulation issues, data privacy issues, trust issues is the major hurdle for healthcare to adopt AI. And another thing that as a startup we see is that the big companies are targeting those big systems to when they have unlimited GPU access, computing powers, and they have the power to change the whole hospital systems. Like the big companies are targeting those audience or those customers. But in reality, majority of the healthcare systems, mid-sized hospitals and the small practices and physician groups, they don't have the IT systems, they don't have the data to actually adopt AI or even to try AI. So I think that's the hurdle we see, is how AI, new technologies serve the underserved, the resource-restrained communities or people. And so, for example, how we fit into their workflow, limited budget, limited time to adopt a new system, how we address when they only have like limited data to even test AI's usability. And those are the issues I think is actually facing the majority of the people in healthcare. As a startup, what we do is to understand the majority, understand underserved, and those people, how we build a product fit into their existing workflow now, rather than wait for 10 years to adopt. And that is not only for small hospitals or community hospitals. When we talk with leading academic centers, they also have the same issues. So I think the workflow integration and is actually the task or for startups, for innovators to address, to build in any AI into the system of the healthcare to drive the adoption.
Very good, thank you. We're almost out of time, but I want to go back to Mark since Shaheen tossed him this kind of question to respond to the AR, VR. I have all of the Oculus headsets and I've enjoyed them. I'm fascinated with some of the experience there are really great, especially the immersive ones. But Shaheen brings up a really important point. Content is, we always talk about content being king. What's Facebook doing there in the context of not only what you're doing, but helping to drive content for VR and AR?
Great question. Also, I really liked your point on how Tesla really reduces the cognitive load on driving. It goes spot on. And in terms of content with AR, VR, I think that's spot on too. And actually, I think it's a combination of hardware, which I'll describe as really amazing. And I think 5 years from now, we'll probably be looking at it as remarkably embryonic. Just to be perfectly honest and candid about it. And the next question is content king? It is. And so right now we're going through a discovery process, which is we're discovering what applications, what things are going to be really interesting to people. And so a big part of that is opening it up to third-party developers. And so third parties are developing games and experiences and all sorts of things from, gaming to healthcare to workplace and things like that. I don't know what things will be successful, right? But I do know that you'll start to see pockets of successes in all those areas, and they'll start to have elements that people like, this really worked for me, and this really worked for me. So I'd say right now we're going through a content discovery process, and we'll probably go through that for the next few years, right? 5 years from now, it will probably seem remarkably obvious what is not obvious today. And people being like, well, why didn't I think of that? It was so obvious. And part of that is this excruciating discovery process, which is putting out lots of things which in kind of a evolutionary way, kind of fail, right? It's the speciation of content. Tons of things are going to fail, but you're going to see some lights out of there. So I'm a big fan of AR, VR in terms of the space. I do think it's an embryonic space. I keep on thinking this is going to be the AR, VR year. It's not quite there yet. And so I've been bullish on this for probably a little bit longer than most people. We're still early. Content is king. It's got a long way to go. I remain very excited about it. I know Facebook as a company is investing tremendously in it. Expect cool things to come out of it. So lots more things.
Well, thank you. We've run out of time, and I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. It's just been a great conversation. I've learned a lot myself. Would like to thank everyone who has joined us for this particular panel. And we'll see you next on the live Q&A.